Ladies and gentlemen, and everyone, good evening and welcome to this Wolper Wellbeing Forum on social media use in adolescents and young adults. What's the impact? My name's Julie McCrossin, and tonight's webinar is hosted by Wolper Jewish Hospital, Friends of Wolper, and our partner for tonight is Parent Guides. If you're new to our webinar, Wolper Jewish Hospital is a leading private hospital in Woollahra in eastern Sydney. It provides rehabilitation, medical and palliative care to everyone in the community within the framework of Jewish culture, religious practice and dietary requirements. Let me begin by acknowledging that we're on the land of the traditional owners of the Kaurna people in Adelaide, where I'm broadcasting from, and I think many of you will be on the land of the Gadigal people, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Some quick housekeeping. Your questions are welcome. Thank you to those of you who've sent questions in advance, and you can start asking questions now and throughout our webinar tonight. Remember, we can't see or hear you. The only way we can get your questions is through Q&A. So if you look down to the bottom there, you'll see the Q&A, and you can click on that and put questions throughout our evening. Our question moderator is Dr. Lena Safro, a very experienced general practitioner in Sydney and also working in the Western Division. She monitors the questions all evening, and I will go to her regularly to bring your questions to our panel. And we will answer as many as we possibly can, and we answer all of them on an anonymous basis. And remember that this webinar is being filmed, and it will be available on the Wolper Jewish Hospital website, where you can actually see a whole lot of our webinars. These webinars have been going for over 21 years and for a couple of years in the webinar online format. Now, we have apologies from the founder of our partner organisation this evening, Parent Guides. They're unable to join us, I'll involve you, because of illness. So let me just tell you something about Parent Guides. It's an Australian non-profit organisation committed to helping parents of school-aged children to educate themselves on a range of issues facing young people. They want teens, parents and educators to have the resources they need to openly discuss and learn about potentially tricky subjects. And they work to educate and equip the next generation with the tools and knowledge that they need. They do publish guides, including online, and they're developed by experienced professionals who are passionate about making a difference. And these guides inform parents, teachers and carers about sensitive issues like the use of drugs and alcohol, social media and sex. And ultimately their aim is to inform and spark open, honest and meaningful conversations between parents and their teenagers. And indeed, that's our aim tonight, including young adults up to the age of 25. So just before I welcome our panel and introduce you to them, we do have a poll for you where I'm going to ask you some questions. I'll ask each question, I'll then pause while you answer it, and we'll immediately give you the answer. And the purpose of the poll is so that our panel get to learn a little bit about you and your attitudes to this topic. So I'll ask our technical host, Michael, to pop up the first poll question, please. Number one, how old are you? 18 to 24, 25 to 39, 40 to 59, 60 and above. So please make your choice. And I should say that hosts and panelists cannot vote, but if we could see the answer, please, Michael. So you'll see there that the vast majority of our audience are between 40 and 60, but 8% are 25 to 39 and 4% are 18 to 24. Our second question, please. How long do you think your child spends on social media daily? Less than 1 hour per day, 1 to 3 hours, 4 to 6 hours, 7 hours and over? I don't know. Your answer, please. Thank you, Michael. So you'll see 9% less than an hour per day, 31% 1 to 3 hours, 26% 4 to 6 hours, 7 hours and over none, and I don't know 33%. Thank you. Our next poll question, please. Do you know why your child uses social media? I'm aware some of you will have multiple children or grandchildren, but you'll do your best. Multiple choice, you can click as many as you wish. To make and maintain relationships with friends and family, to explore identities, to fill up spare time, online gaming, to research products to buy, to find funny or entertaining content, to share their opinion, to learn about something or to research a topic, other, I don't know. So as many as you wish, please. Just giving you a little longer there. And here are our answers. To make and maintain relationships with friends and family, 82%. Exploring identities, 14%. Filling up spare time, 60%. Online gaming, 26%. To research products to buy, 46%. To find funny or entertaining content, 60%. To share an opinion, 24%. To learn about something or research a topic, 42%. Other, 8%. Thank you. Our next question, please. Do you monitor your child's use of social media, child or young adult? Yes, no, I try, but it's difficult. Thanks, Michael. 16% yes, 45% no, 39% I try, but it's difficult. Thank you. And I think we may have at least one more question. Does your child have a different personality on social media? Yes, no, I don't know. Thanks, Michael. 13% yes, 23% no, 65% I don't know. I think we have two more questions, so our next one. Has your child ever been bullied or harassed online? Yes, no, I don't know. Thanks, Michael. 21% yes, 33% no, 46% I don't know. And our last question. Do you ever spend too much time on social media yourself? This is obviously a self-assessment. Yes, no, sometimes, not sure. And thank you, our final answer. 20% yes, 37% no, 39% sometimes, not sure, 4%. Look, thank you so much. That was our poll, and that's to help our panel to get to know you. And if I could now welcome our panel members and ask them all to turn on their cameras so that we can see them on screen. And welcome to those of us who've those of you who've joined us. We've just done a little poll getting some attitudes to social media, and we're just kicking off our panel on social media use in adolescents and young adults. What's the impact? And we're going to have a look at risks and benefits, and a focus on how family in particular can help promote a positive and use of social media that's informative and promotes well-being, as well as looking at risks. So it's my big welcome to our three panelists. Associate Professor Andrew Campbell, if you could wave, Andrew, so we know who you are. He's a registered psychologist. He researches and teaches on digital mental health and child, adolescent and family mental health. And he's the chair of Australia's first Cyberpsychology Research Group in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney. So welcome to you, Andrew Campbell. Welcome also to Dr. Gary Galambos, a consultant psychiatrist and director of Uspace at St Vincent's Private Hospital. It's a young adult mental health service, I think with 20 inpatient beds, and among many other activities. And I should mention that Dr. Galambos is also the New South Wales representative for the section on youth mental health for the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And he's also developing online specialist grade digital mental health tools. And in fact, we're going to hear from all our panel members about some work they're doing on the positive tools to nurture mental health and well-being. But welcome to Dr. Galambos. And finally, welcome to Associate Professor Justine Gatt, who's Director of the Centre for Wellbeing, Resilience and Recovery at NeuRAAssociate Research Australia in the School of Psychology at the University of New South Wales. And I know, Justine, that your primary focus is on mental well-being and resilience, that social media is not a primary area of your work, but you have done some quite interesting studies, which is why we welcome you here. And of course, we're about nurturing generally the well-being of young people as well as social media. So welcome to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone, I'm going to hear a little bit from each person, then we'll have some first questions and we'll move between the panel and your questions all evening. If I could begin with you, Associate Professor Andrew Campbell, our psychologist, just quickly, the first Cyberpsychology Research Group, I must ask you, just what do you mean by cyberpsychology? Welcome to you.
Thank you, Julie. Cyberpsychology started actually 25 years ago, but it was known by many different names. Human-computer interaction was probably the most common one. Later on, it became e-mental health, and then cyberpsychology emerged because it's got different areas. We cover everything from human behavior and technology right into cybersecurity. So we look at how people interact with technology and how it may affect them in health and wellness. But my main area is mental health, and particularly with young people. I want to understand how we can use technology and leverage it to help young people's mental health. And so the University of Sydney back in 2017 allowed me and a group of other experts to get together and form a multidisciplinary group where we've got sociologists and psychologists, medicine practitioners and allied health to research cyberpsychology and how we can apply clinical techniques to helping kids with disorders such as ADHD. We've used video games for that. We've got social media for mental health, and which will be very pertinent for tonight's topic. And now we're doing virtual reality in hospitals for kids' stress and pain distraction during different types of medical techniques.
And I'll come to those direct examples of your work a little bit later, but just to kick off the topic, as I understand, a key idea that you want to share tonight is that you cannot classify social media use as good or bad. It's all about content and what the young person or young adult is doing. Could you just expand on that a little?
Very simply put, I'll give 2 examples. When the internet was first switched on and we used it as a worldwide public tool, very quickly the media started branding it as in the internet causes. So as though we blame technology for the disorders that we get. Doing that, it basically creates an assumption. So if we turn to social media, it's the same thing. There is a lot of bad on social media. I won't say that that's not true. But how you use that content, what the content is, and how we educate people to be aware of that content, that's the more important point. And we've seen a lot of benefits from social media for youth mental health. And that's why I don't want it to be good or bad.
You think that supervision is needed as well as awareness programs, and that really your motto is supervise and engage. Just explain that a little more. Because of course there are people who've joined us tonight because they want guidance on how to help the young people in their life to have a positive use of social media. So tell us about supervise and engage.
The best way I can put it is that when the internet started and then social media and phones and various other things started coming on, we weren't prepared for it. We weren't prepared for its impact. It rolled out very quickly. And to be honest, we're seeing it again right now with artificial intelligence as well. The technology often is rolled out long before we understand its impact on humanity. So supervision, forewarned is forearmed. We need to educate ourselves as adults. And more often than not, as parents, we don't have the time or the inclination to do so. And we tend to get our kids involved in technology before we fully understand it. So we need to be the educators, and to do that, we need to be educated. And that's been something that we've not done very well. So that's what I mean about the supervision. Educate yourself first, then you can supervise your children a lot better.
What do you mean by supervise? And just give us a couple of examples of different, we've got grandparents on tonight, and I'm actively caring as for a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. They're a very big part of my life. And there's screen management and engagement is, but then you've got your teens and then even your young adults. Some of the people with us tonight will have young adults at university who may still be living at home. So could you just give us a sense of how that supervision and engage varies over time?
One of the things we have established in cyber psychology is, just like in developmental psychology, that there are stages of technology engagement that kids will be involved in, whether it be tablet use, watching Netflix, right through to social media use, and then later on actually engaging in wider spheres, and gaming is one of those. So we need to understand the developmental stages and engagements. We need to understand what are the risks at each stage and what are the benefits at each stage. And we also need to understand what it is we're trying to achieve, because there is a lot of time wasting. Now, the truth of the matter is screen time is what's talked about the most, time in front of screens. It's funny how that went out the window when COVID hit, and suddenly time in front of screens was just all okay. So time in front of screens is not the issue. Again, it's what we're doing on the screens. What's it benefiting for our lives offline as much as it is benefiting online?
I'll introduce our other panel members, but can you help me remember, Andrew Campbell, to get some examples from you later of, if there are adults watching tonight who would like to learn more, your thoughts of where they can go for that.
Absolutely.
As we do what I hope is useful and engaging screen time together tonight. If I could welcome in Associate Professor Justine Gatt, you'll remember, the Director of the Centre for Wellbeing, Resilience and Recovery at NeuRAAssociate Research Australia. Welcome, Justine. Yeah, I think a key message for you, in a way it builds on what Andrew Campbell's been saying, is that social media and technology are here, and it's all about learning how to use it. Is that one of your key messages to our viewers tonight?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as adults, when we were growing up, we didn't have these kind of technologies around. So I guess, it's natural to kind of be fearful of these things. But I think we need to recognize that they're not going away. So it might be better to, when your child is a certain age, to actually teach them how to use it responsibly. And, I don't think it's necessarily something to be fearful of. There's a lot of benefits from using.
Tell us about some of the benefits. You're a mother of a 12-year-old, I think, so you're speaking from both research and direct experience.
Yes. So a number of the key benefits, and it was reflected in the poll responses, was one of the first ones is social connection. So using social media, it enables everyone to develop better social skills. They connect with their friends and feel supported and less isolated. The other two kind of key ways is providing an avenue for fun and creativity. So, it's a way we can share our ideas and skills. And the other way is to learn about the world. So, I don't know about you, but I actually learn a lot of world news through Facebook. So I don't watch TV anymore. I get the key things from there. But I also, it's a great avenue to learn new skills. So my daughter often, she finds a recipe online, or she learns how to apply makeup and those kind of things. So, there's a lot of ways you can use it to your benefit.
I'm in my late 60s, and I have to tell you, my entire social cohort appear to be travelling right now. I'm staying in Adelaide being a nana, but I am travelling the world. People take these, I do feel I'm learning a great deal about the world through following the travels of my friends. But look, let me welcome, I'll be coming back to all of you, obviously. I'm just introducing you to our audience. Welcome to Dr. Gary Galambos, our consulting psychiatrist from St. Vincent's Private Hospital. Look, The key message, you're listening to your colleagues. What do you concur with, and what's the key new idea you'd like to introduce before I go to my questions?
I don't think that anything that my colleagues have said doesn't resonate with my perspective. So I don't want to be an echo chamber, but I sort of agree with everything they've said.
But you say there are risks because it's so enticing. And I've got to tell you, I've been a great reader since I was a kid. I had a mother introduce me to wonderful reading. I read less, and it worries me a little bit. And when I spoke to you, you said it's so enticing. Tell me what you mean. What's the risk there? And then how can we as caring adults entice them, the young people in our life, to all sorts of engagement, not just online?
As a psychiatrist, I'm used to focusing on the problems rather than the benefits. So, you know, disorder is the bread and butter of what I do. There's obviously a public health interest that I share with my colleagues here. So we certainly are interested in not being scaremongers. But obviously, I see probably the more pointy end of the spectrum. I see the more vulnerable patients who have problems with social media, such as bullying. I would say the majority of the young people that enter the unit where I'm the director and also admit patients and treat patients, I'd say bullying would be one of the highest risk factors of the patients coming into the unit. So we're seeing people who have for various reasons, needed to come into a more intensive treatment setting where there's psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, social workers providing a multidisciplinary team approach. So we're talking about young adults, 16 to 25, mostly the younger cohort, 16 to 18, I would say would be the majority of our cohort, who come in for a 2 or 3 week admission. The majority, sometimes a week, sometimes a bit longer. And they're suffering mental disorders like major depression, anxiety disorders, personality disorders, psychotic disorders, substance abuse disorders, eating disorders. So the whole gamut. And in this cohort, it's a bit of a select cohort. It's a severer end of the spectrum cohort, and you're going to see more problems, including risk factors like negative use of social media, where they have been bullied or they are bullying, where they are spreading messages amongst themselves that are negative messages, that aren't helpful, that aren't health promoting or healthy messages, so that may contribute to the symptoms and their level of disability. We see problems like excessive use, people who have a behavioural type addiction. It's not a DSM diagnosis yet, but there's a lot of discussion and probably, you know, the way that this classification Bible of mental disorders is going thicker and thicker rather than more succinct and cleverer. You know, chances are it's a matter of time. So we're seeing people who find themselves escaping from the real world and spending excessive amounts of time in the virtual world and to the exclusion of healthy external activity. So that's some of the problems that we see.
And Dr. Galambos, I think that, you know, some will be listening here and thinking, when do you think a young person might need professional help, whether of the higher end of the inpatient or consulting a psychiatrist or indeed a psychologist? We have other here. And so can you give us a sense of it for people who are listening or watching who may be seriously worried? When should you actually seek help, when it's more than just what the other matters we'll be talking about tonight?
So help seeking is a healthy behaviour, and when families, not just the young people, the youth or the young adults themselves, but even if the family is overwhelmed and struggling and they need a break from this young person who's just struggling and the whole family is struggling. So that's interestingly not a bad litmus test. If the whole family is struggling and if there's a lot of conflict and they all need a break from a young person who has one of those disorders I mentioned and where they appear to not be recovering in a timely fashion. So it takes a strain and it's demoralizing and there's struggle. A very common reason is suicidal ideation. self-harm that's escalating, that's not coming under control, where the young person is reaching out and saying, look, I need more help. What we're doing is inadequate. And we're talking about predominantly families where they are accessing professional support, psychiatrists, psychologists, GPs, headspace, group work, where they're really making an effort, but it's just, they're still struggling terribly, suffering terribly, where it's been going on for too long. So that's a few of the reasons that some of the young people come in. There's all sorts of other reasons they might give. Oh, I'm in for a medication change and things like that, or I need coping skills. So there may be some specific rationale, but we're talking about a period of time where we're trying to short circuit the problem behaviours and symptoms.
If I could just ask you one more question before we go to our audience. My understanding is that there is a concerning level of self-harm within the community. I don't know if it's particularly young women. I'll seek your guidance on that. And I understand that there are social media communities you can join where that is being discussed or even discussed in a positive manner. I suppose the question I have here, and I don't know if this is an easy question, is that we've been asked to talk about social media use in adolescents and young adults. What's the impact? I suppose the question is, to what degree is the social media playing a causal or escalating influence? And to what degree is it actually another matter that would have existed and people would have sought their help from you prior to social media? Because we're going to hear from all of you that you think social media can be a positive mental health tool. So just your thoughts on that knotty question.
So sticking in the theme of let's explore the sorts of challenges with social media. Yes, I would agree there's lots of positives, but one of the things that where it can be misused, I would put it that way, it's a technological invention that can be used for good or can be a problem. And there is a concern about young people whose maturity levels are low, and they reach out to each other rather than to help professionals or mentors or adult figures, and they swap maladaptive coping mechanisms. And self-harm seems to be a growing phenomenon. It's not just young women, it's young men and young women. I would say that it's particularly prominent in young women, but I think it is growing in young men as well. The old stereotype was, young men went to substance abuse and young women took it out on themselves with eating disorders and self-harm. But I'd say that the differences are diminishing, and we're seeing diagnoses kind of spreading to both genders, equalising, if you like, less of a difference, which probably reflects cultural factors. But I would say social media does play a part. I have plenty of patients I've seen over the years who advise me that they seek images of self-harm online, they liaise with other peers in forums online, where they get ideas offline. And so it is a phenomenon. There's no question of spreading misinformation as much as positive information. And we know that from conspiracy theories and what have you. So it's no different, I would say, with maladaptive coping mechanisms in young people.
Look, thank you very much to each of you for that introduction. I'd like to invite our question moderator, Dr. Lena Safro, an experienced general practitioner who's watching your questions. Lena, could you bring your first question to our panel, please?
Sure, Julie. We have a lot of questions coming through. Someone is asking to start at the beginning and ask the panel to explain what they mean by social media.
Look, thank you. I know we've got a lot of questions. If I can just ask, to the extent that we can, I might ask you for briefer answers so we get through as many as possible. But Andrew Campbell, would you like to begin? I'll ask each of you what you mean by social media.
I'll give a succinct definition. So social media is basically public engagement. It can be done in segmentation, meaning groups and focus groups, or it can be absolutely worldwide. The main thing about social media is that it's actually, if you will, freedom of speech and freedom of market. It existed before the internet. It is something that's been around for centuries offline. So social media in itself is more a way to get people to listen and to get like-mindedness to congregate together.
Just quickly, when you say it's existed before the internet, what are you referring to there?
Specifically, the German terms Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft basically means that we've got a gathering of social interests that we want people to learn about. And then if you like what you hear, you keep turning up and listening to more of this, and you buy into it. Some of it's for very, innocuous things, hobbies and interests, where others could be very politically motivated. But social media in its true sense now is a global phenomenon through many different communication technology platforms. It's not just Facebook. That was just a very well-known brand. So social media is impacting at the social level of society.
Well, thank you. Justine Gatt from the University of New South Wales, how would you describe it?
Well, the way we define it, I guess, when we research it is in terms of platforms. So we're looking at, the apps and the ways that people can communicate online. So I'm referring to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, even WhatsApp, where, groups of people, I guess, can gather and share ideas.
Thank you. And Gary Galambos, please.
From my practical perspective, it's when the young people come into our unit, and the minute they meet each other, they're swapping their social media tags and names and phone numbers. And the next thing we know, they're all interacting as much using their devices as they are with staff and, observed the communications. It's the more invisible ones that we're not seeing, and then we discover that they're swapping all sorts of information that we didn't realize they were swapping, which sometimes is fine and it's helpful and they're supporting each other that way, and other times it's actually interfering with the therapeutic milieu of the unit, where there's alliances being formed with some, and it's being used to create relationships that are not necessarily healthy. So anything they're using that we can't see, and that's where they're forming groups, and there's group behavior occurring.
And, if we asked people to list them, we probably would have a very long list. One of the challenges, I think, for older people is to keep up with where the action is. Could I say, as someone who's a bit of a cancer advocate, there's a lot of action on LinkedIn, which once was purely about sharing information for the purpose of getting employment. But I now see it as a slightly more intellectual Facebook. So things, even how individual platforms are used, changes. Just very quickly before I come back to Lena, I emceed a major international conference for the Mayo Clinic once, and they had some very interesting evidence on where patients and families go when people have health problems. And many people, the vast majority, go first to, sometimes it's called Dr. Google, but the discerning patient and family will go to ones which have more of an evidence base. But I think this utilization of social media in the broadest sense is not just a phenomenon of young adolescents and young adults. We're just focusing on them and their mental health tonight. Thank you, Lena. Our next question, please.
So there is a practical one and the philosophical one. I'll ask the practical one first. Someone wants to know what length of time per day is okay to spend on social media for high school kids, and what would you consider excessive?
Thank you. I'll come this time to Gary Galambos to kick this off. Thank you.
So our policy with social media is that unless it's been flagged as a problem by a family member, by a parent, or the young person when they come in, unless it's been flagged, we don't monitor their screen time, and we don't scrutinize it unless it emerges as an issue, in which case we'll help them self-regulate, and we'll negotiate that with them, and we'll say what's reasonable. There is a routine, sleep-wake routine and meals, and there's groups, therapy, and there's consults. So that takes them away from the screens. We have a policy where they're not allowed to bring their devices into the group therapy rooms or in the consultations. And we even ourselves don't bring our phones in and what have you, which is very frustrating, I've got to say, but we have to do the role modeling. We tell them they have to turn it off at 11 o'clock and have it off all night from then on. So our policies are not as stringent as you might think, but that helps us understand how they're using it. So I would say it's kind of a personal thing. Like for some individuals, it's, if they're using it only for short periods, but it's quite destructive use, that's a problem. Others, it's more a time thing where they're overusing it. So that's our approach to it.
Gary, and it's critical in what you're saying there that healthy, if I can use that term, engagement with family, friends, peers, study, there's many ways that we might be having screen time that are absolutely positive and spot on. I guess my question is it just about time, or is it what people are doing? And I'm going to come to Andrew Campbell in a moment because I know he strongly has views on this, but in a nutshell, your thoughts there.
Very briefly, I think both, and depends on the individual. So I would say the amount of screen time is relevant because that amount is taking them out of the real world. And obviously what they're looking at and the impact and their capacity to process it, their capacity to cope with it, their capacity to use it well, their capacity to even protect themselves. All of these things are relevant. So maturity, and different young people have different levels of maturity, even irrespective of their chronological age. So it's multifactorial.
I'll just come to Justine Gatt first, if I may. Justine, could you just tell us about your study into the use of Instagram and the lessons that arose from that? Because I think it's relevant to this question of, is it about time or what people are doing?
Yes. So we
just what Instagram is quickly in case people aren't familiar with it.
Instagram is a platform kind of like Facebook, but it's more image based. So you're sharing more images and videos rather than text, I guess. So we actually got a grant from Instagram. They wanted to understand the impact of it on wellbeing, which was quite good, and we were successful in getting this funding. So we ran this study in over 2,000 young people that were ranging in age from 13 to 25, and they were in Australia and the US. And it happened to be in 2020 when COVID started. So it was an interesting time, I guess. And we wanted to actually firstly just compare Instagram users versus non-users to see if there's any differences in their well-being. And this is not controlling for any other forms of social media that they might be using. But when we compared them, we actually found there were no differences in their well-being. So it didn't really matter if they used it or not. But what we did find was what was linked to well-being was how they used it. So that those who are active users, so these, by active users, I mean, it's someone who goes on and actually posts photos or images, and they also actively comment on other people's images. Those kind of users actually had better well-being than those who are passive, who are just scrolling and viewing everyone else's lives, so to speak. And the other thing that we found that was important for well-being was the type of content they were posting. So when they were posting content related to what we called animate objects, so that's living things like family, friends, pets, they were associated with better well-being than if you purely posted more on things like just nature pictures, travel, food, and those kind of things. So really we found that, I guess, with higher well-being, if you're using it actively and engaging with others and, sharing content about other people, I guess, or loved ones, that was more beneficial.
Look, thank you. Andrew, your thoughts, Andrew Campbell, your thoughts on time use.
I'll keep it pretty succinct here. A couple of years ago, Hewlett-Packard, as a company, was concerned about screen time. And they asked myself and other researchers to think about it in the sense of how do we engage people and make sure that what time they're spending online, whether it be social media or anything, was actually meaningful. And over a couple of years, same as Professor Gatt, it was during the pandemic, we developed a thing called the Reflect tool. And you can find that today on Hewlett Packard's website. And basically, it came down to the same thing of looking at engagement in 4 ways online to determine well-being. The 4 areas were actually, what are you doing online that's going to benefit your study or work? What are you doing online that actually connects you meaningfully with family and friends? What are you doing for your health? And then the last part was leisure and creativity. And if it didn't fall into one of those 4 categories, then we were starting to look at some abnormal traits occurring. To answer the person's question about how much time should you spend online, it'd be like saying, how much time should you read a book? It's really about what's the book, how's it making you feel, is it beneficial to your day, and is it something that's really, really enriching your life? So this is why we turned it to a reflect tool of reflecting on your experience rather than your time.
That's so interesting, because I worry so much about not reading books, but in fact, I read a lot of international articles online, journal articles and so on. So it's, I hope our audience, and if you've just joined us, we're obviously reflecting on social media use in adults and in adolescents and young adults and its impact. And our 3 guests are Associate Professor Andrew Campbell, a psychologist and head of Cyberpsychology Research Group in the Faculty of Medicine and Health at the University of Sydney, Dr. Gary Galambos, who's a consultant psychiatrist running the Uspace unit at St Vincent's Private Hospital in Sydney, and Associate Professor Justine Gatt, Director of the Centre for Wellbeing and Resilience and Recovery at NeuRAAssociate Research Australia at the University of New South Wales. Lena, our GP question moderator, let's have another question. I've got questions, but let's have a few more from our audience, please.
Sure. So someone wants to know, what's the risk of children mistaking their relationships on social media as something that it's all they need to survive in the real world?
I might come to our psychiatrist on that, because that sounds like on the upper range. Thank you. Gary Galambos, please.
I have patients who otherwise would live very lonely lives if they didn't have access. Patients with autism spectrum disorder or severe avoidant personality or severe social anxiety. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily great that that's their social life, but I think it would be better than them spending, the majority of their time staring at the 4 walls. So I think it's different horses for different horses. I think there are people who during the pandemic, it was fascinating. The number of young adults with severe anxiety disorders like that, and who were otherwise avoidant, who actually came alive and actually improved and said, wow, everyone knows what it feels like to be me now. They felt that it was so equalizing, and they were delighted that they didn't feel inferior, which was the overriding sort of sense that you get when someone can't participate in a way that their peers can who aren't sort of struggling with that sort of disorder. So you have one end of the spectrum where it actually does seem to benefit them more. The positives outweigh the negatives, if you like. And then you get this other end of the spectrum where it's stifling their growth, stifling their more authentic, genuine, face-to-face, multi-sensory experiences, which they kind of need, and which is going to bring the best out in them. And, the ADHD young people who just get obsessive and just sort of love the multitasking, love the fact that it's moving so fast, everything. They go through 3-second little videos on TikTok, and it's so captivating, and they're getting trapped almost, stuck in this world. There's this enticing world. So there are these ends of the spectrum, and then most people are in between, and someone might suffer a major depressive disorder and be also very withdrawn and struggling. And that might be their little lifeline. It might be the only way they are managing through that. So it's interesting how variable the different experiences you see are. And frankly, as Andrew, I think, said, it's an evolving thing. It's not all homogenous. And that's fascinating, that work on how meaningful and how useful and, how they were using it, basically determined how helpful, beneficial versus unhelpful it was, or just neutral. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I guess it's the thoughts that come to my mind, with regard again to the variety of ways people use it.
Thank you so much. I want to come to you, Justine, Gatt, if I may, because I know that some people will be tuning in for just some very practical advice about how they can work to reduce risks. And because we have heard some of the concerns tonight, I wonder if I could come to you with just some examples of what family can do to manage and reduce risk, because we discussed some when we first spoke. Could you help me with that, please?
Yes. So I think firstly, in terms of if you're concerned about overuse of social media or screen time, there are a lot of things you can do. So you could manage access using parental controls, and there's a lot of apps you can do to modulate that. I guess as a family, you can agree on how much time you want to spend on it. And that's all of you, not just the child. Because I think it's important to model the kind of behavior you actually want to be reflected in them. You can also, I guess, pick when they can use the social media, so, around dinner and so forth, and what rooms, even in the house. But also then plan, if you can, screen time, time when you're not using the screen. So, outdoor activities and interaction. But the other thing in terms of safety is also an important thing. I think, when your child is just about to create an account, and they usually create one before they're meant to, without you knowing. So it's probably good to have this kind of conversation with them. When they could try, for example, with my daughter, when she was setting up her account, I said to her, make sure you...
And what was it the first time?
Her account, I think it was an Instagram one. So I said to her, make sure you set it to private. You don't want everyone seeing what you're posting. Make sure the people that you're following, or the followers, more importantly, are people you actually know, and not just any, random person that could be behind an image. But also, for example, Snapchat, make sure that you actually hide your location, because anyone could track, for example, kids on Snapchat, which is pretty dangerous. So they're the kind of things that I would particularly talk about with her, and I try and follow her also, just to monitor, I guess, what she's doing, if she lets me.
Yes, and if she lets you, and she's 12.
Yeah.
Could I just say, you mentioned dinner, and in other contexts, I've heard that sitting down for meals together as a family and having conversation, making that a part, having, rituals and routines around connection are protective. I mean, you're not keeping the lines open. So would an example be that it's all phones off all off and off the table for meal times, which wouldn't be easy to do. The number of times we're in restaurants and coffee lounges where people have all got their phones. Another one I wonder about is, I understand there's great benefit in walking in nature, and yet the number of people who take their phones and leave them on, and they're at the beach or they're in a bushwalk. I mean, is that the sort of nitty-gritty stuff to talk through?
Yeah, it's about, because my area is well-being, I'm all about being present and in the moment, being mindful and, having quality time and so forth. So I guess it's important, even myself, I sometimes use it too much more than I should be. So I've got to, create the habits in myself to just put my phone down, be present in whatever interaction I'm doing, even if it's just watching TV with her. But it's just, being mindful of what we do.
Yeah, being present. Andrew Campbell, you may wish to comment. I have a question for you, but is there a comment you'd like to make first?
Actually, no, I agree with what my colleagues are saying 100%. Being in the moment is very important. I might add a tip, and that is that I like most adults somewhat connected to the device too much, and that's due to work. So there's text messages and emails coming through, and phone calls I don't take so much because that takes time. I want things quick. So I entered into a little, I won't use the term digital detox, because the detox itself is a case of it's not putting the phone away. It's a case of how do you restructure your life, because it's more than just your phone. But I definitely moved into a reduction in distraction technique on my phone by removing apps. The fewer apps you've got, the better. And then actually you kind of get bored with it. You see it more as a tool rather than a distraction device. So I really only have 3 or 4 apps that I use that are constant for my work or for safety or for information purposes. And the rest of the time, I honestly think, what's the most useful app I can go to relax with? And it's either going to be Spotify for music or a Kindle app where I'm reading. And those are the 2 things I use.
Could I just say, you know, I've been told so many times as parents and grandparents, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah.
And I mean, should we all actually have one phone for work if we're still in the world of work, and one for our social connection? So one of them can be turned off, because I think it's very hard when you've got everything in one little handheld. I mean, they've created it for that, haven't they, to make it super enticing?
Absolutely. I think the practical answer, unfortunately, is probably not 2 phones, because they're so expensive. But the actionable way is to really divide your phone into things that can sleep, things that will switch off outside of hours. So I make sure my email is off when I get home, and it's done automatically. I don't even have to think about it. It just blocks until the next morning. So things that can actually stop distractions that are going to step into that meal time with your family or that TV time, and teaching young people that you can do this, you can switch it on, and it's a great way to actually find that petitioning in life that we had before the world went 24/7 with technology.
It shows you where we've come to, that we're trying to say, don't be on your phone while you're watching TV. You know, it used to be, don't always be watching TV. We've got a dual. I mean, I've seen people with phone, laptop, TV. You know, it's a fascinating thing. There's a quick question, if I may, before I come back to our audience, and that is there any evidence that we're aware of, credible evidence, that our attention spans are being reduced, both as adolescents and young adults, but as adults as well? If I may say, as an advocate in the world of cancer, I make a lot of short videos. If I make a 2-minute or 3-minute video, you can easily get 1,000, 1,500 views. Remember, I'm talking about cancer, so that's a lot. Whereas if I make something that's 15 or 17, and my target audience are predominantly multidisciplinary clinicians or family affected by the cancer. But if it's 12, 15 minutes, it's very hard to get along the numbers. So I don't know if that's indicative of anything, but has anyone got some research on whether attention span is being reduced by social media use? Yeah, Andrew, would you like to answer that? Thank you, Andrew Campbell.
Very briefly, we have a international journal called the Journal of Cyberpsychology, Behavior and Social Networking. So obviously it's something that would hit in this attention span area. And there is a number of articles from very specific countries that look at how content has increased over time. So the United States, Japan, China, they've all shown that, yes, attention spans are more divided now than ever before. And so we're sifting through relevance more quickly to what we're trying to find. And then depth of learning is changing as well. Having said that, an interesting neurological fact is that seems to change again around 25. We see that a lot more purpose of what do I need to enhance my life rather than be entertained or to be self-sufficient starts to change. And then we self-filter out those distractions. So the attention span is changing a little bit in the way we sift information and learn information between the ages of 12 to 25. And after 25, we're seeing it change again. And in fact, we're even seeing it change again now with some new gerontological studies showing that our attention spans shift to more meaningful content the older we get.
Oh, how interesting. Dr. Safro, can we have some more questions from our audience, please?
Of course, Julie. The words detox and addiction come up a lot in these questions. So someone wants to know if there is a definition of addiction in so far as social media is concerned in terms of the number of hours spent.
Can I come to you, Dr. Galambos, on this as a psychiatrist?
I would say that there's a discussion about behavioral addictions. I have colleagues who have set up practices to treat internet addiction, so-called, and they see, of course, the pointy end of the spectrum. They see young people who are, truly, utterly immersed in gaming or social media, or just trawling the internet, to the exclusion of everything else. And so certainly there are people with disorders, obsessive disorders, you could call it behavioral addictions, impulse control disorder. There's various categorizations. Nothing is official yet, but certainly we all see it when we're working in this area with young people, and especially with an interest in this area. I'm sure that my colleagues could give you a little bit more kind of information about what the current research is in the area. So I would say that would not be the primary diagnosis, but certainly are there disordered degrees of use of these technologies? Yes, we see it.
Could I just ask you, you mentioned the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, they sometimes call it the Psychiatrist Bible, and you get, well, you can explain what it is. And I suppose my question is, you mentioned yet, do you have a sense that as we're learning more about the impact of these technologies, which is what this is about tonight, we may see some diagnostic criteria entering the DSM to guide the work of people like yourself?
It's going in that direction. That particular manual, it's a research manual. So what it does is it lists criteria for different diagnoses. It's a little bit like a taxonomy, when you've got the scientific labels for animals, the cat's called the, blah, 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 long name. We all call it cat. In the same way, we psychiatrists, we might say, oh, this patient has a reactive depression, whereas this one has a more melancholic depression. So we're talking about two different types of depression, and person 3 has a mixed anxiety depression or a bipolar depression. So there's different categories. So the DSM, in order to ensure that we're all speaking the same language, so that if I'm speaking to Andrew or to Justine about it, we know that if I say, well, actually, this person's got a major depressive disorder, they know exactly what I mean. They intuitively know what I mean if I gave you those other 3. But the major depressive disorder is this, like the scientific label. So it's a bit like a cookbook, ingredients, and you make a cake. So we've turned all diagnoses into a sort of algorithm with the ingredients. So that's how we classify. But of course, that doesn't say anything about what causes it. It doesn't give any idea about the etiology, whether it's a more biological thing or a social thing or a psychological thing. So most psychiatrists would say, well, this is a social phenomenon intersecting with people with different temperaments. And I would say, and if people have a diagnosis, then you've got all 3 intersecting in a certain behavior. But I would say it's going in that direction, Julie. The DSM is becoming because it's a research manual, they can do that. They can just say, well, here's something else that's been proven. Andrew or Justine might develop enough evidence that it crosses a line, and it's a diagnostic entity then. So I tell all my patients, don't worry, you've just got a label. If I've given you this name, it's just a label. Labels can come and go, and don't get too attached to it, and don't keep it for life, because of course I'm dealing with young people, so I don't want them to be over-medicalized. So as long as we're educating people that it's a label based on an agreed list of criteria. So I would say it is going in that direction, but it just takes a long time to get there, and it's about the accumulation of research. And as Andrew says, this is an evolving area, and these media evolve so quickly that by the time you've done some research, probably there's a new platform that's dominating. So the old research is out the window, right, Andrew?
Would Andrew or Justine like to comment on that question before I go to something else?
No. I'm happy to. Everything Dr. Galambos says, spot on, absolutely spot on. I like the cookbook analogy. We tend to add a little spice every few years to the book.
I guess the question that's probably on the mind of people viewing this who are worried is, should I be worried? It's this question of, should you be worried?
Okay, so I practiced psychology as a clinician for around about 12 years. I stopped and moved into more research and then clinical practice training. And so around 2007 to 2012 was my peak of working with children and adolescents, particularly as social media was at the hotbed of things at that time. Internet gaming disorder was probably the #1 thing that I saw. And then social media was the next problem. And using the term addiction seemed to be a loose term from a media's point of view of, if you spend too much time doing it, you are addicted. And I've heard people talk about this with, I'm addicted to coffee, I'm addicted to books, that sort of thing. In a clinical sense, we've never given that diagnosis. What we tend to see, and I deferred to Dr. Galambos here to sort of verify with his clinical experience, it's far more current than mine, is comorbid disorders, that more often than not, they're presenting with clinical depression, anxiety, social behavioral problems, personality disorders. And the world they've entered to online is either, I would almost say, compounding the problem, adding to the issues that they're already experiencing at a different, and to use another clinical term just to keep things fun, biopsychosocial events, so that the biological, the psychological, and the social worlds colliding together. So to get to the point of, is it something we should be worried about? If the person has disconnected from their friends and family, if they are wasting money, if they are not working, if they're sleeping very poorly, eating poorly, not exercising, have anger outbursts, are self-harming, all of those things I just mentioned are incredibly important to get help for. The internet disorder, whether it be addiction, overuse, however you want to put it, would be kind of the label on top. It wouldn't be the core diagnosis. So there is often a very big underlying problem that we need to look at.
Look, what I'd like to do in a moment is turn to some examples of positive use of social media to nurture well-being, because I know each of you are working on that, but I'd like to, sorry, Lena Safro, I'd like to take a couple more audience questions quickly and then turn to those examples. I'm just watching our time. So, and more from the audience, please, because I know you've had a lot.
Sure. So as peer group influence in adolescence becomes more important, what do you do to counteract that?
Peer group influence. Justine, Gatt, do you want to kick off on that? The effect of your relationship with your peers on your social media use.
Well, I think, as I said before, I believe, using social media can help promote social connections. So particularly with your friends, you could share ideas or images or photos together. But I guess another way to look at it in terms of technology, it's kind of mimicking what you might see like in the playground. So, if you get accepted into a Facebook group, it's kind of like being included in, the group in your schoolyard, so to speak. So
my memory of that at high school, it's a tough old game, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
It's inclusion, exclusion, often over and over again.
Exactly.
And that will be played out in multiple platforms, and where people can often see your numbers, can't they? I'm not sure. With some you can and some you can't.
Yeah, I think I believe Instagram, I don't know if they still do it. They've turned off number of likes so that it's not such a counting kind of game anymore. Yeah, I mean, there's these phenomenons actually that have arisen. So what you call FOMO, so fear of missing out. So this is why, a lot of kids want to be on the social media, because they want to be able to engage with their friends to see what else is going on. Because if they're not part of it, then they feel excluded.
But you can be aware that everyone's at a party you've not been invited to. I mean, I'm not saying it's trivial, but I can remember when that really mattered.
That is probably a negative impact of it, and it's an easy way to ostracize someone, really easy. So it is a difficult thing to manage, I guess, but
You're about to launch a new app for adults, and you're also working on a child's version. Could you just talk about that, just so we get that example?
Yeah, so because we're trying to understand well-being from a neuroscience perspective, we've been doing this work for a while, and we actually created a well-being scale for adults to measure well-being in its entirety. We now have created this app called NeuRAAssociate for adults. So it measures your own well-being and gives you a profile, and it gives you daily activities to do to actually promote your own wellness. And we're going to launch that app soon, but we want to then translate that work to children. So we've just created this child version of the wellbeing scale called Compass Kids, and it's actually targeting kids from 5 to 12 years and their parents, so that we can actually measure well-being in them, give the child actual agency in reporting on what their well-being is, rather than relying on their parents and teachers to report on it, which is usually the case. And you can see the biases in that. So we're trying to actually test this right now. And then the idea is to, understand the mechanisms in well-being in children, separate to distress and anxiety, depression, because they're very different concepts. And then be able to create these kind of apps for kids as well.
And is the idea of that app that it's something you might do with your child, parents and children together?
The NeuRAAssociate app is just for adults at the moment, because it's got language, only adults would understand. But when we translate it to children, it would need more pictures and interaction, I guess, at their developmental level.
Thank you. And look, if I could come to you, Andrew Campbell, I want to hear about your My Circles program, which I think is linked to Kids Helpline, but that you've had a pattern of partnering with various bodies that work with children and young people, but trying to then bring these positive use of social media. But tell us about My Circles.
Very simple pitch, actually. We've been working with Kids Helpline for 12 years, or a little bit over 12 years.
And explain Kids Helpline, just so people know.
Yep, Kids Helpline. So they're a national provider of youth mental health support services, both telephone counselling and online counselling. As you can imagine, kids don't like talking on the phone much. In fact, that they started in the 1990s, so they evolved to the web. Essentially, they wanted to be able to capture a number of kids with similar problems, make sure that they could monitor them and the conversations, and provide mental health information to them at the age level that they're at. So we developed from scratch a social media platform called My Circle. It's been under many other names up until now, but Wolper actually ended up sponsoring it. So they're the ones who said, let's call it My Circle. It's available right now nationally. It's been running for a couple of years. We've finished all the data collection on it, and we found that those as young as 8 years of age, right up to 25 years of age, have found benefit in being part of a mental health social network that is only for their age group. So we actually, we find out who they are. We have good checks and balances with them. They have a counsellor and a case manager. And then we allow them to enter a small group with people who've got anxiety disorders or disorders that are similar to them. Anxiety and depression are the main two, but we've had even some success, particularly during COVID, of those feeling very stressed and anxious and at the self-harm stage by being cut off from their communities at school. In regional and rural Australia, which is a different cohort again, and very smaller population. So we've been following this now for just over a decade. We've got a manual that's coming out very soon on how to use social networks, not just the Kids Helpline My Circles module, but any social network in the world to protect children, provide some benefits of education and information if it's age appropriate, and let them come back and create their communities for positivity, because mental illness is not going to be solved in, unfortunately, a short period of time. It's often a chronic condition, and they might re-enter services and re-enter support networks all across their teenage and adolescent years. And that was the main thing we wanted.
And is that moderated by adult supervision?
That's right. So Kids Helpline provides the moderation. It's a mixture of 24/7. So there's some web chat and some counsellor presence for group counselling. And then there's one-on-one counselling if there's severe cases. And then those that are getting better, and those that are actually starting to really gel and get benefits from the community, they have ambassador recovering people. So people that have actually gone, you know what, this has been really good for me. I'm going to help others now. And that gives them a sense of agency as well.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Galambos, I gather you're working, as well as being a clinician with an inpatient unit, you're working on online specialist grade digital mental health tools. Can you explain what you're up to, please?
Look, it overlaps a bit with Andrew, but more on the educational side of things. So what I discovered working with young adults over the past 12 years in this dedicated unit, this sort of young adult oriented unit. Initially, we were 16 to 30. Now we contracted to sort of 16 to 25. We're now looking at even going younger because that seems to be where the major demand is. And because other facilities around the state have started becoming more inclusive of young people when they weren't before. So it's a great trend towards early intervention, which is fantastic. But what I've found over the years is that the young people were not finding online the sorts of education that they were receiving in our program, and that seems to be what they're craving, more sort of coping skills and more understanding about their diagnoses and their disorders and their symptoms, and about how to, what the different arena is out there with help providers, the different sorts of clinicians. You know, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and psychologist is the old, you know, sort of saying, but there's a whole bunch of other clinicians that help people, counselors and ADHD coaches, and there's a huge range. And in fact, everyone's into mental health now, and everyone's saying, yes, I can help you. Exercise programs, and it's all true. It's all true. So there's the diagnoses, there's the types of help providers, and there's also the system. The system itself is, I don't want to get into this too much, but it's traumatizing. It's so fragmented that people have a very torturous pass through it before they find that package that works for them. And there's no integration. I mean, hopefully that's coming. You know, that was actually one of the announcements. We're going to help integrate the virtual teams out there more. So just from demand, Julie, I started developing, and like Justine said, more quite visually based, even though they're 16 and up, but they still seem to really have attentional difficulty. You know, if anyone's struggling with anxiety, depression, they're often just as attentionally disturbed as young people with ADHD, for example, which is the stereotype, you know, the core attentional disorder. And so I wanted to develop something that was digestible to them. And so I started just developing diagrams and pictures and things in the sessions with them. And they were saying, yes, we need more of this. We can't find it online. And then they started saying, look, I want to be able to look at this with my families. Can you put it online? I was emailing it to them, like taking pictures and doing it in PowerPoint and emailing it to them. And they were saying, well, that's great, but we're missing 3/4 of the stuff because you're talking about it. Can't you develop something online? So it sort of inspired me to do that. And that was the biggest mistake I ever made because, you know, my family have barely seen me these last few years. I've been immersed in the
screen
world. On the screen, I'm the biggest culprit, developing all this stuff.
And so this is still a work in progress.
So it's been about 3 years. It was the 10 years of working at Uspace, just developing the e-learning type material, the content. And then I've spent the last 3 years building it with a startup team. I've learned about startups, and it's been a really interesting process. And so we're going to launch in about 2 months, actually. It's very close. Thank God, you know, because you know, I've had way too much screen time, as you said, doing this.
You know, well, one thing I'll just very quickly say this. I'd like to get 2 or 3 more questions before we finish. That the challenge always with these resources is how we all know about them. And I might just come back to you later, Andrew, if I can remember to say your thoughts on, for people watching this and even for each other, to follow up on your own developments. But let's come back to Dr. Lena Safro and get some, we've got time, I think, for at least 2 questions from our audience. Thank you.
Sure. There is an interesting one. Someone wants to know about the emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence and its use in social media. what are some of the strategies that you can use to open the conversation about AI with young adults? Because with these new technologies, it's difficult for them to discern between the reality and the online world.
Fascinating. Look, I might come to Andrew Campbell, if I may.
We are literally scratching the surface of this right now. So in as less as 8 weeks, I've been engaged in 3 very similar to Dr. Galambos startups that you don't realize how much work's involved. You say yes, and then there's your life, it's gone. Having said that, AI is absolutely something we need to get on top of as quickly as possible, particularly for education to young people. The number one advice I could possibly give, and it really is just from experience, I can't even give you publications at this time, is that we need to explain the definition of AI to young people. They need to understand that it's collective information synthesized to make it look like it's one person saying it, and somebody that's very convincing at that. We need to fact check everything. It is not the answer to our worries. It's not going to be an almighty technology god unless we allow it to be. We really need to look behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz and realize that it's a lot of data collection that's being spewed out to make it look like it's conversation. So
And
that's
Andrew Campbell, is it fair to say, obviously we don't have time to go into it in depth now, that this is another major disruptor, that this is another boom?
100%. I would definitely put this on the level of social media. There is no question. To be honest, I'd actually put it up even higher because it is moving between realms of visual, conversational, and then decision-making. So on a very medical and health level, one of the things we've been doing for a number of years now is using AI for diagnoses and treatment programs based on clusters of health. You mentioned cancer before. It's being used in cancer research quite a lot. So there's some very good, clever ways it's being used and making much better diagnoses and treatment plans for complex cases. But when it comes down to the social, political, psychological, economic aspects of our world, wow, watch out, we've got to be careful.
I might just simply say the Wolper team that developed topics for this may consider a future look at AI and its implications in the world of health and beyond. I might come back, if I may, and let's see if we can get a couple more fresh questions. Lena.
Sure. Somebody is asking to please post the names of the wellbeing apps that the 3 panelists were mentioning. Would it be possible to send them as part of the email that's going out to everyone, Julie?
Look, thank you. I think we'll collect information from our guests and Ruth Guth, Michelle and the team will send out information. I think there has been a question in relation to the dark web. Was there something to do with that, Lena, coming through? Just because that I think it's something that frightens some families, it might be worth just quickly asking about that.
Sure. So someone wants to know how the parents can monitor the use of the dark web and the access to the dark web and the dangers of the dark web.
Is Andrew, I sense Andrew may have something to say about this, but is there, I'm just checking, will I go to Andrew first and then I'll hear if the others wish to say something. Andrew, just explain what that means and what concerns may be and what one can do about it.
Dark web basically is an alternative information pathway that's not as well regulated by various protocols. It can be accessed through regular apps and various ways. For example, there's a social media platform called Discord that you can actually access the dark web through as well. Having said all of that, the dark web really is a case of nefarious information and nefarious activity. How to help people to be wary of it and to judge it is actually around about cyber safety in general. Understanding what are good websites and bad websites, how they use your information, how they can actually manipulate it. All of these things can be accessed through a thing called the Cyber Safety Commissioner website. I've put forward a couple of links for the email tomorrow, and the cyber safety one is in there. I would particularly look at what's called the YES project, which was done on a national level for protecting young people at different ages, but also teaching them good behaviours to be what's called digital citizens. And hopefully they won't go on the dark web.
No, thank you. Justine, Gatt, just because I know you're so much about mental health and well-being, is there anything you would recommend as a a source of positive information and guidance in the use of social media? Does that come within your bailiwick?
Yeah, actually, when we were doing our project, I came across a great government website that I think is really helpful for anyone to look at. It's called the eSafety Commissioner website, and it posts really helpful information on, parent guides on how to actually, use screen time controls like apps and so forth. It also gives all the latest research on, the kind of guidelines and things you can do to help promote good social media use. And it even gives you information on how to have conversations with your children, if you're worried about a particular issue, but also support services. So where you can go if you're having a problem. So if you need, for example, the Kids Helpline, there's Headspace. There's another foundation called the Butterfly Foundation. It helps kids with eating disorders and body image issues. So I would really recommend, and that's a web link I've included in the email that will go to everyone. If you really want to know a bit more information of the research, but also guidance, that'll be a great website.
Dr. Galambos, is there any resource you would recommend to those who are viewing who want to, we've been told at the beginning we need to learn more as adults in order to be able to engage. What would you recommend?
Yep, the best resource is right in your skull, to spend time talking with your young people about your concerns and about the risks and the pros and what you're concerned about with them. Not just this is dangerous, but I don't want you to get hurt. There's dangerous people out there and you need to protect yourself. And you're right, we can't watch them every minute of the day, and they can work around a lot of these digital solutions that we have. They're brighter than us. They know this is their native language. This is a second language for us. For them, it's one of their primary languages. So we have to learn how to trust them. And in order to trust them, we have to give them enough information for them to digest at a level that they can understand and hopefully accept and take on board and know that they can come to us even if they are stupid and make mistakes and get hurt, and do it early, not to wait, not to be scared. Even if we are annoyed with them, we want to help them and avoid things getting too serious, too bad. So it's all about listening to them and getting them to listen to us and validating what's going, what they want. That it's, saying no is not going to work anymore. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. There's no stopping them from accessing it anymore.
And if I could just say, I've helped to raise two children with a mother and a father. And one of the things I applauded them for was that in dealing with issues of drug and alcohol use, they shared errors from their own youth or even their own struggles through time. It was obviously at an age-appropriate level, but it was a mutual engagement. And I observe my adult children with these young children now as a grandmother. These children are very young now, but I certainly discuss my concerns about my attention span and scrolling, not engaging. I found that it's such a useful idea from Justine Gatt. So again, that notion of a mutual conversation, we're facing the challenge of this digital disruption and then the AI together. If one can keep that, my partner always says that we've just got to keep talking.
And we're in the age of collaboration, not authority anymore. Young people, the culture's changed. They don't just listen to the experts or to the authority figures anymore. So, and they feel that Dr. Google's the authority figure. Dr. Google comes before me, as you say. They'll come into my practice and they'll say, well, this is what I've read and I've heard. And I can't anymore say, oh, that's a load of rubbish, don't listen to it. I'm the expert. In fact, I know I'm secondary. So it's more about me then being more of an advisor to them and collaborating with them and them getting respect of me by understanding that I get their culture, I get their wavelength. We have to learn from them actually as well. So with
I guess what I was trying to say.
I got a group of Gen Zs on my team, because I learned all about it when I was, learning how to develop this language, mental health literacy. Mental health is a language. So the language as well, just like digital literacy is. I really believe that after spending so much time, working with young people. And they want to learn the language. And in fact, everyone does now. It's really interesting. The demand is massive. The supply is small. So what we're doing is trying to do something at scale, but it's not going to substitute for people, parents, families, talking, being authentic, collaborating, wanting to know what they're up to. I actually do take time to try to go to my kids and say, what are you looking at? What are you doing? And I realize it's actually quite fun. Sometimes I learn from them. So learning from them, it's got to go both ways now in the current modern culture, or they're not going to take us seriously. So we've got a lot to learn, how to engage with them. But the old-fashioned truth is that spending time with them, I know we've got so little time. And we have to find ways around that. So yes, I do spend a lot of time working, but I also go on holidays regularly with my family. I know that the only way that I'm going to stop using my mobile and my laptop and all of that, okay, I admit I sometimes take it along on holidays, but that holiday time is so precious and the kids so appreciate it. It's so powerful, just like dinners, just like spending some holidays together. Any time we're spending with the kids is the antidote to the problem. Yeah.
Look, I want to thank all our panel members, Dr. Gary Galambos, Associate Professor Andrew Campbell, and Associate Professor Justine Gatt. Thank you so much for contributing to this. And I'd like to hand over to Lena Safra, who'll give us an indication of what's coming up next in the Wolper Community Forums. Thanks, Lena.
Thank you, Julie. And on behalf of the Wolper Education team, I'd like to thank everyone who joined this webinar tonight. And of course, we love your feedback. And we hope that you can take a minute in the next few days to respond to our email and to let us know your thoughts. The next Wolper Wellbeing webinar is planned for Wednesday, the 19th of July. And it's going to deal with an interesting topic of adult ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Why are so many adults being diagnosed with ADHD? And how can you live a healthy and productive life with that diagnosis? We hope you can join us.
Oh, thank you so much. And we will send you connections to many of the resources that have been mentioned tonight. It's just been a thoroughly interesting and engaging conversation. So ladies, gentlemen, and everyone, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you in July. My name's Julie McCrossin. We might just clap our audience farewell. And this is the conclusion of tonight's webinar. Thank you very much.